Nick, welcome back to the Live and Learn podcast. Thank you for coming back on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having
Popular
me.
demand, obviously.
Bribery.
yeah, or favours. Yeah, thank you for being very generous with your time again. We really enjoyed the last episode, obviously, on human-centric leadership. We want to cover resilience on this one. I think that's a really interesting topic, a kind of big buzzword for everybody. Before we dive in my head, you are kind of learning development royalty. Do you want to give a bit of background on your L&D journey and kind of what you're doing now? Because you've got lots of things that you do and you specialise in.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, royalty. I'll have to make sure my
put
pictures aren't doctored. No, I'm just kidding.
That's a separate podcast, I think.
Yeah, this is my real voice. Yeah, thank you so much. Lovely to be here. Yeah, so I'm Nick. I do a few things. So just to tell you a little bit about my current situation, state of play. So I'm the VP of Employee Experience at an organisation called Avalier Health, who are trying to make the world a healthier place through solving complex healthcare problems. But I also have another hat, and I am an experience architect for an organisation called Unthink, who are partnering with organisations to transform and flip up L&D. We don't do workshops, we do experiences. We'll bring the weekend into the workday to transform leadership and culture and behaviours and D&I and all that good stuff as well. So I do that. My purpose on this planet is to transform and change the way we think and feel at work. I am a HR troublemaker on purpose, and I purposefully, I believe that work can't suck. We spend a third of our life in it, which means that our life is taken up by other people telling us what to do, which seems insane. So let's make sure if we're being told what to do, we're doing it in a way that means something to us and it's purposeful and it's meaningful. How I got here is quite squiggly. I have a collection of portfolio of experiences that made me who I am, from a Nando's griller to a kids entertainer. I studied Performing Arts University and then went to LA to study as an actor. Unfortunately, didn't quite get there. Hence the reason I've landed in learning.
On this podcast now.
Yes, one step at a time. Yeah. Maybe one day. Still waiting for that King Lear knock on the door. But then I pivoted into retail, and actually I had an agent when I moved back into London after LA, and I had loads of jobs to live in London, of course. One of them was working at Hamley's toy store. One of them was selling advertising space for West End mags. One of them was selling photos at retail in London Aquarium. So I was one of those people that sort of takes your picture as you come in and says, "Smile, stand here." And then I sold those photos, and it turned out I was really good at selling stuff. So basically lying to people for money, manipulating them to get coin out of their pockets. And then I sort of said to my bosses at the time, like, if everyone else is selling the same thing, like numbers I hit, imagine how much money we make. And they were like, "Oh yeah, fair enough." So they let me run a training session. My first ever training session was for 40 people, with a backdrop of the Shark Tank in London Aquarium. So you can imagine this little white shark as I was talking about sales. It was sort of like, you can't really picture a more perfect metaphor.
I was about to say, perfect backdrop.
Exactly. But something stuck for some unbeknown reason. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. So instead of like playing a different character, I can just be who I am myself. And actually through the words I say, through the things I do, I can change behaviours, which changing behaviours changes, well, everything really in life, which is quite interesting. So I did that, and then all of a sudden my career snowballed there. I was running and traveling the world to Australia, New Zealand, Dubai, Spain, all over the world, training people on how to be better humans as well as sell stuff. And the better human thing was quite fun. So I leveled that up a little bit more, and then I wanted to take over the whole of the people function. So I moved to be the head of HR at a B2B tech company in Manchester, and then joined Fisherwack, now Avalier Health, as their global head of professional development, which was really boring. So I changed that job title to career experience, and now VP of employee experience. And I look after physical workspaces, so from offices all the way through to the entire employee life cycle, from the moment you hear about the business to the moment you leave, and then work with Unthink, and now here trying to change the workplace. So I do a lot of this, which is wonderful, but I also do a lot of writing. I've got plans to start a brand new event at the end of the year. I mentioned Troublemaker. We're building a community of troublemakers, so a HR Troublemaker Festival at the end of the year, and all bits in between, just to continue to change the way we work. Yeah.
So I think given your background, you're very well qualified to talk about this episode, which is workplace resilience.
Ooh, we hope so. Bounce back ability. Yes, lots of setbacks.
I remember that. That was famous from
Soccer AM?
Yeah, Soccer AM and Ian Dowie, wasn't it?
Yeah.
If any Crystal Palace fans, I'm not a Crystal Palace fan. I guess to kind of start, what does resilience mean to you? And because I guess context, it's if you ignore AI, which is a big thing to ignore, obviously.
Yep.
If you look at any kind of L&D surveys or sentiment surveys, resilience, along with kind of upskilling, maybe is always near the top.
Yeah.
What kind of context? Why do you think it's now suddenly become back on the agenda? Obviously, without the kind of LinkedIn buzzwords that always float around, but resilience seems to be back on everyone's list. Doesn't? Do you think?
It is. Resilience is high on everyone's list. And hey, it's not just in work, it's in our lives. I was listening to Good Morning Britain this morning as I was getting ready. There was this big topic that the government is talking about, how, you know, people are pinning mental health issues under their lack of resilience, which is nuts, actually, and insane. And there's nuance in there, though, that sort of talks about, well, how do we deal with setbacks? And for me, within the workplace, resilience is the ability to deal with failure or deal with things that are not aligned with what we expect, and deal with things that have happened that didn't go the way we think they were going to go. And it's really fascinating why this has come back up, because generations have different views of this, and we live in a multi-generational era, and we're only going to be working longer. But if you look at some of the more tenured generations in our workplace who have lived through different things and setbacks, and it was a really good conversation. If you think about people entering the workforce now, it wouldn't have worked in 2009 when we had the big economic crash, which really shook industry. They've only known economic growth, and yes, COVID hit us, and that is a whole different work stream, which is a tangent we can go off in a minute. But ultimately, once we got through that, business was growing until sort of 2023, sorry, and then the beginning of that, and then we started to see hits happen. And when you combine stuff going on outside of our lives that affect us psychologically and physically, and you combine that with a workforce and leaders in workplace who need to change and pivot quickly and reorganize and restructure, then things happen to us that don't go, that we never expected. And how you then adapt to those challenges and changes, your ability to adapt, that is what resilience is.
I love that definition. And I think we want to kind of look at some top tips to kind of improve or boost resilience. I think when I was doing the research, I was thinking about this myself as well, and I think it's all about setbacks as well. Being authentic to yourself, I feel, is quite high up the list. I always find it's a good reference point if something's going wrong or not as you planned. It's easier to have that kind of centre point of, I stand for this, so therefore I can bounce back with that as a reference point. That gives me a bit of comfort. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, we talk about values, right, as a lot in organisations, and they tend to go nowhere. They tend to be sort of superficial, slap on walls and screensavers. But personally, I encourage every human being needs to know what they value. Even if you don't know, go find out, because whether you know it or not subconsciously, that is your authenticity. That's your authentic self. It's your center. It's what your core is made of. Like for me, it's all about grit, creativity, inspiration, imagination, and fun and joy. And those are my sort of centers. They evolve and they change. But I know that as long as I'm equal in those and I'm living those and I'm true to myself and I'm authentic in the way I approach the world, then I can pretty much deal with anything that comes my way. But yeah, being authentic to who you are and being a generally kind and good person will help you through difficult times like that.
And what about perspective? I mean, we've got some video arts titles on there. Other e-learning providers are available, but obviously come to us. That's something that people can struggle with, especially if you're put under a big setback. Setbacks come in lots of guises, small, big, whatever. Work, outside of work. How would you kind of give people tips of keeping that perspective? I think that's something that's really good for resilience, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, call it zooming out. I think one of the things we struggle with in this day and age is the technology we interact with, whether that is from what we watch on Netflix to what we see on our scrolling news feeds, is geared to what we want, right? We're recommended things that we've watched previously. We see posts. The algorithm is built on things you like. So everything you think, things you search on the web will show up in the things you like, which means we're constantly given cues on things we agree with. And the minute we're given feedback, the minute something changes under us, which doesn't align with what we agree with or isn't what we expect, we take that and we internalize that and we over catastrophize that. So your point on perspective is good. But if you see all of it, good, bad, and the difference between sort of high performance here and being able, it is how you deal with changeables and uncontrollables, right? And just understand what is in your control and what is out of your control. The reason why people are scared of flying is because they're not flying, they're not in control, right? Yes, it's the height things, but it's the control thing. My life is in someone else's hands. I find that terrifying, right? But actually, when we think about the ability to be more resilient or deal with setbacks in a different way, it's about honing in and simplifying. Well, what can I control? Let me put the energy and efforts in my control, right? And this really interesting thing around going back to the chemical thing, I heard this recently, is about the gap and the gain. When we talk about gap and gain, right? So we talk about gap is where you are today from where you want to be.
Yeah, nice.
And we get really anxious about that. That's where cortisol hits. That's where stress hits, where we go, but I'm only here and I've got to get over there and all these things are changing and they're unable to meet my goals, right? Where we think about all that ambiguity. When we think about the gain, that's your dopamine hit, because that's when you look back and you go, look at how far I've actually come and look at all the things that I've done. And when you start to stop and reflect backwards and the journey that you've taken, no matter whether you're 18 listening to this and gone through your schooling education or not, or an apprenticeship or wherever you've gone through, or you're 65 listening to this and you've got all that lived experience, turn around and think about all those things that you've done. And all of a sudden what you do is you're putting yourself there, you're painting that picture in your mind to say, actually, I've achieved and overcome adversity before. I'll achieve and overcome adversity again. And then all of a sudden you use that mindset to step into the next challenge that you've got. So you're using the gain to fill the gap, right? And that's really important for anyone listening to this. If you're going through a difficult time or something's changing under you, what can you control? Look back and see what you've gained and what you've done and use that to close the gap.
Because I think a lot of people say, you kind of learn back or enjoy the ride or the journey. To me, that was a more tangible way of saying that. So that was really practical.
It's hard to it's difficult. People say, oh, get over it, you'll be fine. It's like, yes, your lived experience, not mine. And remember, what you're feeling is okay. I think, we've done well in the last few years to normalize being able to talk about how we're feeling, which is great.
Definitely getting better. The stigma's lifting a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. The problem is like, okay, now I know that's how I'm feeling. How do I then help go through to the other side? And I think it's about, again, focusing on, right, what's in my control and then what's the next thing I do, and do the next thing and then the next thing and the next thing. And then again, you look back and go, cool, yeah, we walked 100 steps and now we've moved, but we were here. Yeah. And
what would how do you think it's kind of changed the dial a little bit with workplace resilience, with the office or hybrid? And that's a whole separate podcast in some ways, but I guess as a manager, leader, spotting the signs of someone struggling, or just yourself not recognizing patterns as much maybe, or do you think it kind of makes things, sometimes you work from home permanently, it might be easier to be in a little bubble, and then if you get a setback, it can be harder to bounce back from. There's lots of nuances to it, isn't there? I think it's changed the way it works massively.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like you're walking the shop floor, you're able to then sort of see how people are doing, coping. But the problem is, as well, is that doesn't work for everyone. Like
exactly.
We've moved into an era where companies are deciding who they want to be when they grow up. And by that, I mean organizations decide if they want to be a mandate or a magnet employer. And a magnet is where you draw people back that they want to come to. When it comes to resilience and working hybrid, so if you're working from home and you're isolated in that way, in terms of like, it's me, I'm task, I'm productivity driven here. The problem is when we don't have social cues, we over catastrophize in our mind.
That's what I was,
so and the problem is, and organizations can do this by providing context to messages. One of the worst things you can do as a manager or a leader is say, oh, I need a quick catch up. Because you go, that could mean, am I getting fired?
Yes,
am I getting promoted? Yes. Am I, all in the same second, your brain goes through things, right? And then you over catastrophize all of these different nuances.
Absolutely.
Without saying quick catch, I just want to talk about X and X. Oh, great. Now I can think about that, right? And go through that. And just remember, you have people who are on at very, like, what's happened now is we're on a lot more at different times than we were before. Right, so pre-pandemic, we were on probably commute in, and we would start. A lot of us would start. Like roles would change, people would work in the evenings and whatnot. But it's less common now. Depending how people work, people are on a lot more for earlier and later, which means that as a leader, you got to know that if you send an email or a Teams message at 8 p.m. saying
you're going to read it,
and you're going to read it and catastrophize and blow that up. So you need to sort of reset norms for your business around how you meet and how you talk about things like messaging. But when it comes to sort of spotting signs if someone is struggling, one of the answers here, and the answer we go to immediately is, as L&D professionals, is go like, right, more training. And actually it's a behavioral trait that we need to start instilling in giving people skills to own their resilience, right? Versus managers stepping in and saying, God, this is another thing I've got to, not only am I feeling it, which they are, by the way, managers are almost twice as disengaged as employees at the moment, but also, and HR is just as disengaged, right? So this is this huge problem, but actually giving employees the opportunity to say, right, I'm feeling something, I've got the tactics, I've got the advice, I can own this myself, and I'm empowered to own it, I think is better. And a lot of the worry around resilience, a lot of the negativity around resilience and people not being able to deal with setbacks is the fear of getting stuff wrong. It's like the fear of failure.
Yeah.
But how you normalize and learn from that in your organization is going to dictate how your people react to it, right? So leaders, we model the emotions. You know, we like 83% of us model the emotions of our leaders.
I didn't know that.
Right? So if you've got a leader who's crap,
I have very high
resilient, like not resilient, and over catastrophizes and freaks out and panics, what do you think the impact's going to be on your people? You know, it starts with that modeling, really, top down. So then people can feel like, well, I'm empowered. It's a setback. I'm over it.
And what would you say to, you kind of touched on it there, we've got maybe someone who's just new to L&D, or they've been tasked with building a resilience program, which is very kind of open-ended. I mean, that's just a massive task. And where would you start? And because again, it's not just a typical, you know, training program. Maybe it's very different for different people and different companies. Maybe what they want, the business might want when they want resilience. What they want, resilience, is very different to what is good for the user as well. Actually, back to the human-centered piece.
Yep.
Resilience could, for a company, might mean we're going to do restructure and we want everybody to like handle it well.
Yeah.
That's
Be
what
okay. You're losing your colleague for 30 years. Just say goodbye. It's
that's
fine.
what a
Move
business
on.
might want. That's very different to improving resilience because it's the good thing, the right thing to do. So as L&D, you're kind of caught in the middle there. How would you tackle that? Whether it be something was off the shelf or a program put together, or some values or some habits, or like how would you tackle that if you were, I don't know, head of L&D in a new company?
Yeah, and they're coming.
There's a resilience
build
issue.
resilience in our business.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the first thing is telling people, like we forget this, but we've got to tell people what resilience is.
Yes.
And why it matters and what it can do to help benefit your life. Like any experience that you're designing for any human being, you've got to make sure it's really clear what you're going to benefit from it. So by very, very first thing you do is you start there. Let's define the problem. Right, together, like curiosity is the key, right? So let's define, why is this a problem for us? What are we happening? What are we seeing? How is it affecting our customer? How is it affecting our business and our people? Right, you define those problems and you're right, okay, now we know what the problem is. Now we think the answer is if we increase resilience, but what is resilience? Let's define that a little bit more. And once you know what resilience is, you know the problem that is you're trying to solve, then break it down by understanding, currently, we think resilience is broken up into things like adaptability. So how well you adapt to changing environments. We think it's broken down into changing. How do we deal and how do we manage change through communication and storytelling? And we also think there's more in this on a deeper level to understanding stress and anxiety. So let's figure out that a little bit. So once you've broken that down, you start to build experiences that micro and into the macro thing of resilience, right? Now, once you sort of understand, you've defined it, and you understand the competencies that build a culture of resilience, you then start to architect an experience that's actually going to leave someone feeling something different, not another piece of something, right? And another training session where you're stuck in a goddamn classroom with crap lunches.
Or
terrible
a
food.
Shark Tank behind you.
Get a Shark Tank. Get a Shark Tank behind you. You've got to recraft the experience that people are going to go through. And what I mean by that is take them out of their comfort zone. If you can bring people together face to face, you have to do that. And remember, learning doesn't happen by going to the gym once, right? So if we go back to the idea of, if you go to the gym once, you're not going to be fit and healthy, right? That's it, done.
It'd be great if that's how it
works.
Of
course it would. But the problem is we're so scared of patience and discipline and understanding that actually patience is needed to build a culture of resilience. You're going to have to do drum beats of consistent program, consistent experiences to help people feel and navigate through that. Is it a priority for the business, or have they just thrown it away and said, go and be more resilient? Like, build and measure resilience, make sure you've got good data sets to pre and post to understand how you're tracking and measuring the change in experience or change in resilience levels, right? Yeah. Gap analysis on the skills, understand it, define the problem, define the skill, and then build the the experiences that are going to actually close capability gaps, right? So take people out of their comfort zone, go to an environment that is not nice and talk about it, right? Go and stand in the rain for a bit and talk about what are we doing here? Why are we in the rain? Why is it busy? And then figure out, right, okay, now working back, how do we control our controllables? How do we understand what we've done to get where we need to go? You know, things like that would help. But start breaking it down, you know, chew that elephant one nibble at a time.
And do you think leaders play a kind of key role in this in terms of psychological safety? Maybe it can help other people's resilience if they show not weakness, but their vulnerability maybe.
Yeah.
That they also struggle, or it's a setback for them as well. And if you see other people bouncing back, it might give you the model of actually, that's okay, rather than I guess social media mentioned. Everyone projects a very positive.
Everything's perfect, isn't
especially LinkedIn as well. LinkedIn's a good example. Love LinkedIn, but everything is just amazing. So every company's got record profits, or everything's great.
Yeah. So pleased to be here today. Tag at
yes.
Hashtag leadership. Hashtag get real. Yeah. Look. And you're right. I mean, leaders need to do a really good. One of the best ways to build resilience from a leader is to build optimistic realism into your language and your context when you're talking to people. What I mean by that is a really good example of this sort of in the war, right? Where you have the eternal optimists who are like, we're going to be home before Christmas. And then you've got the people who really drove culture within the war, and it was like, it's the optimist realists who say, we're going to be home, but it might not be before Christmas, right? And that really hits. And then you're going like, so that enables you to go, we're going to be home, and there are going to be setbacks along this way. And it's like, you know, facing organisations at the minute, we're having engagement hit, but no one's graph and performance and excellence ever started at the bottom left and went in a straight line to the top right.
Yeah.
All of it is a lightning bolt. And, you know, culture is built through drum beats, not lightning bolts, but all of it is a zigzag. And life is zigzags. Without the shitty bits, you never appreciate the great stuff that comes through. Yes, it can sound easy for me to sit on the sofa and speak profoundly, like, you know, I don't feel as a human being. Of course you do. Everyone has a reaction. The key is, how do you move from a reaction into a response, right? And so we react, and that's when anger sets in, jealousy sets in, kicks that back of your teeth, and that gut punch. It's okay to feel that gut punch, but it's how you then get back above the line to deal with that setback. And that is the difference between people who excel and people who actually drive change in their businesses to people who go, oh, well, never mind. And then you tread the water. Now for me, in our profession, we cannot afford to take a step back and go, oh, that training didn't work. We saw no behavior change. That presentation was naff with the board. Oh God, that didn't work. And then just allow ourselves to submerge in this. Like, we have a duty we've chosen. Everyone says, like, put your hand up if when you were 6, you wanted to be a HR professional, right? And it's like, yes, but you still can choose right now the role you've in. You haven't fallen into anything. You've chosen headfirst.
It's very specific choices every step.
Go into this world. Like, so your choice to go into this world means you're actively showing up, which means that you've got to deal with the setbacks as they come, basically.
That's a really good segue to the question I had actually on resilience. Do you think it means different things to different generations? Obviously, the workplace generations are separate, probably a whole separate big topic. Do you think, you know, baby boomers versus Gen Z or millennials? Because there's often this. I think COVID was. I thought was really interesting. The younger generation were like, "Oh, we've now got something we've lived through. We can." Now. It almost felt like a badge of honor, which I found really bizarre. As if you wanted this bad thing. Well, perceived bad thing to have happened. Do you think it varies, or do you think there's some kind of constants between different generations with resilience?
I think there's a goal. That's gone through it, but I do think that people have a different perception of what resilience is. So you mentioned sort of more tenured or older generation saying they use it as a phrase to say stop making a fuss, right?
Or like toughen up.
Yeah, I mean it's just like, well, we're just saying like we would just get on with it.
Yes.
When we wouldn't have this. We didn't have this or this support, but they use it now, and that generation in the workforce are using benefits more than anyone else. They were using EAP, they're using therapy support, and it's just this big sort of what we call the Pygmalion effect, right? Which is the idea that your belief in something will predetermine an outcome, right? So if you believe someone is not resilient, then the chances are you'll project your behaviors in a subconscious way, which will make them not be resilient. So I do think that generations will come back and say, well, we just did things differently in our day and we didn't have all the support and there wasn't the big focus, and get on with it. At the same time, we haven't really defined what it means for people. And I'll go back to the idea of defining it in your workplace, because until you define something, there's ambiguity and people will interpret it in very different ways. And we've got to be okay. I think one of the big things that people fall back on is older generation. I've seen this firsthand say, well, this team isn't resilient because they can't take feedback.
Yep.
And it's like, well, way we give feedback is very different, and it all starts with school, right? And everything comes out. It's a very different podcast that we probably need to talk about, but everything that we bring into the workday starts at home, and it started through the environment that we live and grown up in, and we take all of that in, right? So if you think about how people entering the workforce now have been brought up, have been educated and moving through, very rarely do we tell people how to course correct. Wrong. High performance about feedback quickly, right? I see it myself. Like the way we parent now is very different than we were parented, and the way that our parents were parented by our grandparents, who were parented by saying like when did the cane go out of circulation? What, 70s, 80s? If you think about that, right? Think about how we're saying no, break that out of you. It takes years for people to unlearn those sort of behaviors. You're bringing all of that into the workplace. But we over-catastrophize everything, don't we? We over-catastrophize all the little things that happen, rather than saying, this is just your lived experience. Yeah. Let me figure out how I can get you to the other side, and let me be really honest with you. And I think if we get better at being honest with folks, and another really beautiful thing came up at an event I was at yesterday about this idea of left hand, right hand. So the idea is right hand is all the things that we think and say. I'm thinking this to you, Simon, and I actually think it'd be a really good idea if we went in this direction. Yep. The left hand is all the things we think but we don't say.
Interesting, yeah.
Right, so the left hand would be like things like, I think we should go in this direction because what you're doing is actually harmful for the business. I think that bit, but I don't say that bit. So one of the ways you can sort of normalize candor is by saying, right, before we start, who's got any left hand things they want to say and get off their chest? Okay. Yeah, so it's that way of normalizing candor. And the more you normalize candor, the more you drumbeat that in, the more resilient you can be. The problem is we are sort of entrenched in our organizational process and policy to say once a year you get feedback, and it's through a thing we call performance reviews, right? Invented by the army to determine skills of soldiers. We're now using that as a metric to reward people when they get feedback once a year. It's nonsense. And actually what we need to do is make sure people are okay saying, like, in the moment, this is great, this isn't great, let's do better. And we do that from a place of care and wanting to get better as a people and as a business. Right, so people are perceived as not being resilient because they get feedback and they don't get it. But if they're only getting feedback once a year or sporadically, again, it's a lightning bolt. It's not a drumbeat. You can't build a habit that way. You want more resilience. You get more feedback. You talk about it more openly. It's not a one and done. As well. Yeah, exactly.
We always wrap up each episode with a live and learn example, as you well know now. If you've got an example linked to resilience, and you've got lots of those you probably lean back on, where you had a funny story or anecdote to kind of share, where you had to be particularly resilient yourself, maybe.
For me personally, I guess the biggest call of resilience for me was when I was a kids entertainer, right? So now bear in mind, if you can picture a big blue Thunderbird, that was
a great image.
I won't say the name of the business, but so I was karting around London at the time, running kids parties, everything from big town halls of like 40 small humans running around to like intimate settings where it's like 4 kids in their lounge, and you go, okay, fine, no worries. And I remember like one poor bloke who had obviously thought of doing the right thing, booking, and like bear in mind the show is probably aimed at 3 to 5 year olds, and 5 would probably be the more mature side of the audience, I would say. And they're kids are the most inquisitive, resilient things in the world anyway, by the way. It's so funny. But anyway, different topic. So anyway, I get booked for this 8-year-old's birthday, and we're talking about like the kids entertainment, like magic tricks are things like, you've got a wand which is like floppy. I appreciate this is going to sound horrific. But you pull the end. Oh God, this is going down the rabbit hole. But anyway, you pull the end of the wand, and then it like magically fixes. That's what I should have said. Not floppy, broken. Sorry. Anyway, you pull it and it fixes, right? But there's obviously string in the middle of it that you pull, and then it fixes. I did this for 8-year-olds. And like 8-year-olds now are like, game it. Like there's no hiding things from it. So I did it, and it was just like talk about like, ultimate room full of buzzkills. Like, anyway, throwback to the other one. it was just silent. And anyway, the birthday kid just got up and went, "Hey, why don't you just go and die?" And like halfway through the set, and you're going like, and I was there, and it was like, I did this terrible trick, and at that point I had a puppet on my hand, which was an orangutan. I just remember looking at the orangutan going, "What is my life?" And then but I remember like controllables, I put it away, packed away, took my money and ran, and then remembered thinking maybe this isn't the right thing for me to be doing anymore.
But if you deal with that, I mean, you hopefully no one at work said that to you, because I mean,
no, but I have, like I mentioned to you, I'm dyslexic. I have had someone say to me, "Your career will be jeopardized because of a double space." I remember someone saying that to me once. I've had conversations, patronizing conversations before with very senior leaders who brought me into an office to say, why don't you just, like, before you send an email, like, why don't you just print it out and then read it all the way through? And I was going, yeah, great advice. Probably not going to do that. Thanks for not understanding the human being that I am, and also that I'm just, I'm more fun than you are. So
I think that's a perfect place to end this episode, Nick. Thank you so much. Again, I've took lots of notes and learnings from it. I'm sure everybody else watching has as well. Hopefully you've enjoyed coming back. But thank you again for your time and experience, and lots of top tips to take away.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me to natter at you for a little while, and hopefully you got some. Yeah, look, have me back. It's been so much fun, and wishing you guys all the best.
Thank you. See you soon. Thank you.